They handed me the letter on my birthday, not a card, not a cake, not even a polite email with a line about best wishes. No, it was a crisp sheet of corporate stationery with my name spelled in bold at the top and the word termination like a headline for a life I hadn't agreed to end. I smiled. That's the part everyone still asks about, why I smile. Imagine a paneled conference room with fluorescent lights humming like dying bees overhead. Imagine a plate of cupcakes someone had abandoned on the counter because HR wanted to check off team celebration before lunch. Imagine the smell of burnt coffee rising from a paper cup and the click of my boss's pen as he slid that letter across the table as if he were finally cashing in on months of effort. I smiled because the story wasn't ending. It was just shifting seats. The letter itself was boilerplate. This termination is effective immediately, due to redundancy within the compliance and systems unit. Redundancy? They always pick that word when they can't admit the truth. It's a word that tastes like metal and paperwork, like something you can't chew but are forced to swallow anyway. He leaned back, satisfied. His tie was crooked, always a half inch off center, like he wanted people to think he didn't care. The man had built a whole career on making negligence look like style. His eyes flicked to my hands, maybe expecting them to shake, to clench, to betray me. They didn't. I kept my fingers loose on the table, the way I'd practiced for months. You don't survive in a boutique finance company without learning to notice patterns, the delayed emails, the unrecorded verbal approvals, the files that disappear when accountability threatens to land in the wrong lap. You also don't survive if you show your hand too early. So I smiled. And then I reached for the letter, folded it neatly into thirds, and slipped it into my notebook where I keep every receipt, every audit trail, every time-stamped copy. My grandmother taught me to never trust memory alone. Keep your own ledger, she used to say, because one day someone will pretend the numbers never existed. The silence stretched. He tapped the table. You're taking this better than I expected. I met his eyes. You never were very good at expectations. He chuckled, but it landed wrong. Too brittle. He was used to people lowering their gaze, to awkward apologies, to quiet exits. He wasn't used to someone who'd already made peace with the moment. Because here's what he didn't know. I had seen this coming. The signs had been building for 6 months. Every time he reassigned credit for my work. Every time he delayed approvals until the deadlines became my fault. Every time he insisted on efficiency while erasing the safeguards I was hired to maintain. I had logged it all, not in whispers, not in gossip, but in clear, dated, documented notes. I slipped the notebook back into my bag, stood, and smoothed my jacket. The cupcakes on the counter looked ridiculous, sprinkles bleeding into the frosting under the glare of the lights. No one had touched them. Anything else? I asked. His smirk flickered. Maybe he wanted me to plead or argue or rage. Maybe he needed me to. But the room stayed quiet, except for the hum of the fluorescent lights and the faint whir of the air vent. I walked out. Not rushed, not dramatic. Just walked, the heels of my shoes clicking down the hallway past framed posters about integrity in action. The receptionist looked up from her desk, startled. I gave her the smallest smile, too. She wouldn't know what had happened until the memo came through later. At the elevator, I pulled out my phone. One number already waited at the top of my call list. My thumb hovered for just a second. Then I pressed it. "Ready?" the voice on the other end asked. I looked at the folded letter in my bag. More than ready. That's where I'll start. With the smile, with the letter, with the reason I didn't flinch when most people would have broken. Because if you're still listening, if you've ever sat under those buzzing lights with a piece of paper trying to erase your existence, you need to know it doesn't have to end there. Stay with me. The details matter. The truth is, that birthday letter wasn't a surprise. It was the punchline of a joke I'd been hearing for months, whispered in different tones, sometimes sharp, sometimes casual, sometimes dressed up as feedback. It started small. They always do. 6 months earlier, I was sitting in the open plan bullpen when he walked past my desk. No hello, no acknowledgement, just a quick glance at the chart I'd been building. Too detailed, he muttered, not even stopping. Executives don't read footnotes. I'd spent 2 weeks collecting those footnotes, verifying every vendor invoice and cross-checking payment batches against compliance schedules. The kind of detail that keeps a company out of legal firestorms. But in his world, details were dead weight. He liked glossy slides, quick slogans, and, most importantly, having his name at the top of the deliverable. That was the first red flag. The second came a week later, when I found my quarterly audit plan, the one I had spent nights drafting, circulating as a PDF with his initials in the header. Streamlined by MR. No mention of my name. No trace of the hours I had spent balancing risk scores with staffing models. Just his stamp. The third red flag arrived with a smirk. He called me into his office, closed the door, and leaned back like a king on his throne. Listen, he said, you work hard, but you need to be more efficient. Executives don't like it when compliance slows them down. Be quicker, less rigid. You know, friendly. Friendly? That word. As if protecting millions in client assets was supposed to feel like a customer service call. I kept my expression neutral, nodded, and left his office. But that night, I opened a fresh page in my notebook and wrote 3 words in block letters. Rule of 3. 1 red flag is a mistake. 2 is a pattern. 3 is intent. From that day, I logged everything. Dates, times, subject lines, who was present, what was said. Not speculation, just facts. Because in a place like ours, facts were oxygen. And I knew one day someone would try to choke them out. The sabotage escalated. Approvals he sat on until deadlines passed, forcing me to send apologetic updates. Meetings he scheduled at times he knew I was already double booked, so I'd look careless for missing them. Emails where he forgot to CC me, then accused me of being uninformed. But here's the thing, he underestimated how quiet people notice. Take the payroll clerk, for example. A quiet man in his 50s, gray hair cropped close, glasses perched permanently on the edge of his nose. He rarely spoke more than 3 words at a time, but he kept meticulous notes on every transaction. One day, while we were both waiting for the printer to spit out its endless reams of paper, he leaned closer and murmured, "Your timestamps don't match his edits." Then he walked away, leaving me with a stack of printouts and a new thread to pull. Or the night security guard. He always did his rounds at 9:15 sharp, jangling keys on his belt. One evening he found me still at my desk, reconstructing a report that had accidentally been deleted. He tapped his watch, gave me a look that said, "Be careful," and later slipped me the access log showing which accounts had been used to enter the file room after hours. Guess whose credentials were there? Even the auditor, an outsider contracted by the board, noticed. During one of our reviews, she lingered over my cross-reference tables, longer than usual. "You document well," she said. It wasn't flattery, it was recognition. These were small alliances, almost invisible, but they mattered. Meanwhile, I held on to my grandmother's mantra like armor. Keep receipts. One day, someone will pretend the numbers never existed. So I did. Receipts of him forgetting to sign approvals. Receipts of him deleting comments in version histories, but missing the backup metadata. Receipts of his voice raised in a meeting, declaring that compliance was a luxury, not a necessity. And then came the week of my birthday. He called me into his office on a Tuesday morning, the blinds half closed, light slicing through like prison bars. "We've got an urgent request from upstairs," he said, pushing a USB drive across the desk. "We need a clean slate. Archive everything older than 6 months. Start fresh." I stared at the drive. "That violates retention policy." He smiled, shark thin. "Policies bend. Efficiency doesn't." I didn't touch the drive. Instead, I asked, "Do you want that request in writing?" His eyes narrowed. Don't be difficult. But difficulty was the point, because I knew right then that this was the final test. He wanted me to erase the very trail that kept him accountable. He wanted me to scrub history so clean that no one could prove what had been done, what had been signed, what had been changed. I left his office without the drive. That night, I backed up everything again, triple this time, across encrypted channels that had already been cleared by legal. Not a single keystroke outside the rules. If he wanted me to bend, I'd bend like steel, not like glass. And so, when he slid that termination letter across the table on my birthday, he thought he was erasing me. What he didn't realize was that I had been preparing for that moment for half a year, one receipt at a time. And if you've ever felt gaslit at work, if you've ever watched your credit vanish under someone else's signature, then you know the receipts are power. Don't throw them away. Stay with me. Because the night before my birthday, something happened that turned all those receipts into leverage, and that's where this story sharpens. The night before my birthday, the office was almost empty. Desks sat abandoned under the buzz of fluorescent lights, half-empty mugs leaving rings on reports no one would read until morning. I stayed late, not because I wanted to, but because I knew what tomorrow would bring. He had told me to wipe the slate clean, archive unnecessary history, start fresh. That was his phrase, start fresh. It sounded harmless, like spring cleaning, but in a compliance department, fresh meant dangerous. Fresh meant no trail. So I sat there at 9:47 p.m., staring at my monitor. The cursor blinked over files labeled with 6 months of my life. Audits, reconciliations, vendor chains, approval logs, every single one of them linked to a decision he had bent, delayed, or sabotaged. Every single one was a receipt. Here's the part he didn't know. Deleting files from the shared drive doesn't erase the history. It just erases the surface. The skeleton stays in metadata, timestamps, authorship, IP logs, and I had long since mirrored that skeleton into an encrypted drive cleared by legal counsel. Everything double-signed, hashed, dated. So when he barged into the room the next morning, holding a USB drive like a weapon, he believed he was about to stage the perfect magic trick. Watch me make 6 months vanish. Plug it in, he ordered. I didn't move. He shoved the drive closer. Do you want me to do it for you? I looked him straight in the eye. Do you want me to send legal the request with your name on it? His jaw tightened. He wasn't expecting that. He was used to people folding, people erasing things quietly and pretending nothing ever existed. He leaned over, stabbed at my keyboard, pulled up the shared drive himself. With a flourish, he highlighted entire folders and hit delete. Gone. Just like that. Except not gone. What he didn't notice was the icon on the bottom of my screen, the auto backup already running, streaming copies to the compliance mirror system. He didn't see the timestamp note I had logged the night before, recording his exact instructions. He didn't hear the faint click of my phone, propped against a stack of binders, quietly recording every word he said in that room. I want efficiency, he declared, pacing. No one cares about old receipts. Nobody reads the fine print. They just want results. Got it? I nodded once, neutral. My heart didn't even race. I had already rehearsed this moment 100 times in my head. But then my phone buzzed. Just once. Just enough to break the rhythm. I glanced down. A single notification lit up. Incoming call. Flagged secure line. I excused myself, left him gloating at his clean slate, and stepped into the hallway. My voice was steady as I answered. Ready? The voice asked again. Same voice as the day before. Calm, measured, almost amused. Yes, I whispered. Then listen carefully. We've reviewed what you sent. We want to meet. Off-site. Today. I pressed my back against the wall, staring at the framed poster opposite me. Integrity in action. The irony almost made me laugh. Where? I asked. They named a place. neutral ground. The kind of coffee shop where no one looks twice at a laptop and a quiet conversation. By the time I returned to the conference room, he was sitting with his feet on the table, sipping burnt coffee from a paper cup, smug as a king. "All taken care of," he said. I smiled. Not because I was beaten, but because the game had just expanded beyond these walls. Here's what he never understood. Systems have memory. People have memory. And when you try to erase both, you only draw more attention to yourself. I slipped the folded termination letter into my bag, left the office, and walked straight to that coffee shop. The woman waiting there was not what I expected. Mid-30s, sharp blazer, laptop open, but screen angled away. She didn't waste time. "We've seen your reports," she said, sliding a flash drive across the table. "We know what he's been doing. We know what it risks. And we're prepared to act." I stared at the drive. "Who exactly is we?" She smiled. "Let's just say your company isn't the only one watching. Clients notice. Regulators notice. And people like you, who document, who don't bend, are very valuable." That was the first time it hit me. Oh, all those nights logging data, all those meticulous notes, all those quiet red flags. Someone beyond me had been paying attention. And suddenly, my birthday firing didn't feel like an ending at all. It felt like a trigger. I left the cafe with the flash drive in my pocket, my notebook in my bag, and the strangest sense of calm. For the first time in months, I didn't feel cornered. I felt aligned. Because here's the secret. When people try to bury you, they forget you're a seed. Stay with me. Because what happened next wasn't just about me keeping receipts. It was about pulling one thread and watching the whole fabric unravel. The morning after that cafe meeting, I walked into the office knowing it would be my last day there, at least on their terms. The folded termination letter was still in my bag, but now it felt less like an ending and more like evidence. The trick to leaving is simple. You don't slam the door. You take the hinges. I didn't clear my desk dramatically. I didn't send a farewell email dripping with sarcasm. I moved like routine. Logged in, opened files, printed 3 innocuous reports. I gave him nothing to point at. No tantrum, no spectacle. Just silence. At 10:07 a.m., I sent a short message to HR. Effective immediately, I resigned my position within the Compliance and Systems Unit. Please consider this written notice. That was it. No accusations, no long explanations. Just one sentence, and then I walked. Not out of the building yet. First, I made a detour. Down one floor, through a door most people ignored. Into the storage room where hard copy archives gathered dust. I had checked the key out the night before. Inside, boxes lined the walls, stacked like forgotten soldiers, audit binders, vendor contracts, payment schedules. I placed 3 folders gently back on the shelf where they belonged, copies I had legally signed out for cross-reference. No extra pages, no stolen secrets, just careful returns, logged by the clerk who barely looked up as I signed the sheet. Clean. Perfectly clean. Why did I do it? Because in war, the side with the cleanest hands wins the longest. By noon, I was gone. But here's the part he didn't expect. When people like him think they've erased history, they never notice who else is keeping score. The payroll clerk, remember him? The quiet man with glasses sent me a single text that afternoon. It read, "He asked me to backdate approvals. I refused. I documented it." The night guard followed the next day with a scanned copy of the entry log. Same timestamp, same boss's credentials, same violation. And the auditor? She left me a voicemail. "The board will want to speak with you. You've built a paper trail that cannot be ignored. Don't disappear." Piece by piece, the structure I thought was holding me captive turned out to be scaffolding for something else. Every ally had their fragment of the truth, and now those fragments began to click together, like glass shards forming a mirror. Still, guilt lingered. I'd left behind colleagues, good people who couldn't walk away so easily. They had mortgages, children, medical bills. They couldn't afford to smile at a termination letter and treat it as an opportunity. I carried their weight with me, like stones in a pocket. But opportunity doesn't wait. Within a week, I met again with the woman from the cafe. This time, she wasn't alone. Two others sat with her, one from a rival firm, one from a client account that had been bleeding trust under my boss's efficiency. They didn't ask me to betray NDAs. They didn't want secrets. What they wanted was structure, the kind of airtight compliance framework my boss had tried to burn. "Show us how you documented," the client rep said. "Show us how you built resilience into a system designed to fail." I opened my notebook, flipped to a page labeled Rule of 3, and walked them through my method. Log everything, link everything, never rely on one channel. Their expressions shifted from curiosity to recognition. They saw the value, not in stolen data, but in process, discipline, ethics. "Do this for us," the rival firm said. "Build us a compliance arm from the ground up." I didn't answer immediately. My mind was still on the people back in that office, the ones still under his thumb. But then I remembered my grandmother's words, "Keep your own ledger, because one day someone will pretend the numbers never existed, and maybe if I built something new, I could give them a place where numbers always existed." I said yes. 3 days later, the first domino fell. A flagship client, one of the accounts my boss had bragged about streamlining, froze their renewal contract. The reason? A verification audit. One of mine. Time-stamped, signed, filed months earlier. The very document he had tried to erase. Without that contract, revenue forecasts plunged, meetings multiplied, whispers filled corridors, and though I was no longer there, my name still sat at the bottom of those audit logs, in neat black ink, undeniable. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Karma doesn't shout. It arrives in silence with a stamp and a signature. Stay with me, because the ripples of that one frozen contract spread faster than I imagined, and the louder he tried to cover them with noise, the clearer the truth became. The first domino didn't just fall, it hit the table with enough force to shake the rest. Within 48 hours of that frozen renewal, whispers turned into emails, and emails turned into meetings no one wanted to attend. The flagship client's hold triggered questions from others. If they're hesitating, what don't we know? In finance, hesitation spreads like fire in dry grass. I heard about it secondhand at first. A former teammate messaged me after hours. "They're panicking. HR asked for copies of your old reports. He's furious. They can't find them." Of course they couldn't. He had deleted them himself, or thought he had. The board demanded explanations. He responded the only way he knew how. Louder, harsher, faster. He fired off memos with words like efficiency realignment and client-focused optimization, phrases so empty they rang louder than silence. But the more he talked, the more people noticed what was missing. Dates, signatures, receipts. And receipts don't just disappear. The payroll clerk came forward quietly, sending HR a note. I was asked to backdate approvals. I refused. Documentation available upon request. The night guard provided his access logs. The external auditor submitted her observations in a sealed report. One by one, the fragments assembled into a picture so sharp it cut through his noise. Meanwhile, I stayed quiet. No posts, no comments, no contact beyond the rival firm and my new client. I worked late, drafting the skeleton of a compliance framework that didn't bend under vanity. My office was a spare room with a second-hand desk and a lamp that hummed when it got too hot. But it felt freer than the entire glass building I had left behind. The irony? While they scrambled, I celebrated my birthday dinner a week late. Nothing fancy. Just a small restaurant tucked between a laundromat and a bookstore. My parents, my sister, one close friend. They brought a cake with uneven frosting and a candle that sputtered halfway down. I smiled harder at that cake than at any corporate sheet cake I'd ever been forced to cut in a break room. Because for the first time in months, I wasn't choking on someone else's expectations. Back at the company, though, expectations were collapsing. He doubled down, sent a department-wide email accusing unnamed individuals, of fabricating records to undermine efficiency. The irony was so thick, I almost laughed when a former teammate forwarded me a screenshot. He had deleted the very evidence that proved otherwise, and now he was accusing the people who had kept it alive. It didn't matter. The board had already opened a special review. That's corporate speak, for we don't trust you anymore. And then the regulators knocked. It started with a simple request: documentation for one client's compliance reports, the kind I had filed months earlier, the kind he insisted were obsolete. He stalled, tried to substitute new drafts, even claimed old ones had been lost in system migration. But regulators don't take excuses. They take receipts, and receipts are exactly what I had. The woman from the cafe, the one who had slid me that flash drive, called me on a Tuesday morning. "They're coming to you," she said, "not because you broke any rules, but because you're the only one who followed them." I didn't panic. My files were clean. Every note dated. Every action cleared. I didn't need to twist anything. The truth was heavy enough. Meanwhile, inside those glass walls, HR scrambled. They issued surveys about department morale. They called emergency meetings on restoring trust. None of it mattered. Trust, once cracked, doesn't glue back together with PowerPoint. He kept sending emails, kept trying to sound in control, but I'd seen it before. The louder someone shouts about efficiency, the more they're covering for chaos. And clients noticed. By the end of that month, 3 contracts sat in limbo. Not canceled, not renewed. Just waiting. In business, waiting is as loud as walking away. I didn't celebrate. Not yet. Karma doesn't rush. It waits until the noise dies down, then arrives with the weight of inevitability. One evening, after a 12-hour stretch, drafting frameworks for my new client, I closed my notebook and sat back. Outside my window, the city was quiet. No buzzing lights, no smirking tie, no forced friendly slogans, just silence. And in that silence, I realized something. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building. Stay with me. Because the collapse wasn't complete until the boardroom cracked open, and the regulators demanded the one thing only I could provide. By the time the summons came, the collapse was already written in the numbers. The company had lost 3 major contracts. Staff turnover spiked. HR had stopped answering emails with anything but "under review." And the man who thought he'd buried me was finally the one cornered by receipts. The board convened on a Thursday morning. Glass walls, leather chairs, the kind of room meant to intimidate. He walked in with the same crooked tie and forced confidence, clutching a binder so thin it looked almost empty. He didn't see me in the hallway as I arrived from the other side of the building, escorted by the auditor and a representative from the regulatory body. I wasn't an employee anymore. I was a witness. Inside the room, he started with noise. Charts, slogans, excuses. He blamed sabotage, resistance to efficiency, outdated compliance culture. He talked fast, like if he filled the air long enough, no one would notice what was missing. But regulators don't care about noise. They care about paper. And when they asked for paper, he had none. The auditor slid a folder across the table. My reports, my signatures, time-stamped, backed up, verified, evidence that the safeguards had existed until he ordered them erased. He paled, tried to laugh. "These are old drafts." "No," the auditor said calmly. "These are compliance records. Your employee documented everything, including your refusal to sign approvals." Silence filled the room, the kind of silence that kills careers. He tried one last play, turning toward me, smirk barely holding. She was always difficult, couldn't adapt. That's why we had to let her go. I met his eyes. "You didn't let me go. You signed my evidence." The regulators didn't smile. They simply noted the contradiction, closed their folders, and made their recommendation: removal for cause, pending further investigation. And just like that, the man who thought he had power over me lost it all. Not in a dramatic explosion, but in the quiet weight of signatures and silence. The board thanked me, formally, politely, the way corporations do when they realize the person they underestimated is the one who saved them from worse damage. They asked what I planned to do next. I already knew. 2 weeks later, I launched my own firm. Small, lean, built on the framework I'd carried in my notebooks. Not flashy, not loud, just solid. My first client, the rival firm that had approached me at the cafe. My second, the very company that had fired me. The irony was delicious, but I didn't gloat. I drafted their contract with stricter terms than any I'd ever seen them agree to. Mandatory transparency, independent audits, 0 single-point failure. They signed. They had no choice. And so I found myself back in that same glass-walled conference room where my birthday had been ruined. Same table, same hum of lights, different gravity. This time I placed a frame on the table. Inside it was the original termination letter, folded neatly, mounted behind glass. Their new compliance lead, a woman I respected, looked at it, confused. Why bring this? I smiled. Because every system needs an artifact, a reminder of what happens when receipts are ignored. The room was quiet, not hostile, not heavy, just quiet, the kind of quiet that comes after a storm when the air's finally clean. I left with my head high, my notebook under my arm, and no regrets. Because here's the truth. When someone tries to erase you, the best revenge is to make yourself unforgettable. Not through noise, not through rage, but through the kind of meticulous, undeniable presence that outlasts every crooked tie and hollow slogan. I had walked into that office on my birthday with nothing but a letter meant to erase me. I walked out with proof, allies, and the seed of something stronger. And when karma finally arrived, it didn't come as fire or fury. It came as a signature, a removal, a quiet shift of power. That's justice. That's closure. And if you've ever sat under fluorescent lights with a paper trying to erase your existence, you need to know this. Keep your receipts. One day they'll be the difference between being forgotten and framing the proof that you were right all along.